Think forward. Think Research Channel.
Most of my time online is spent probably entertainment. There's YouTube and other video databases where you can access some of my favorite cartoons and shows. There's also video games. That's probably the other 50% of the time that I use it. And there's also research you can do. It's really primarily entertainment, I would say.
Usually I communicate with my friends, MySpace and Facebook. I check my email. Well, unless I'm doing a research project, I, research online, but it's mostly to communicate with my friends.
It depends on what my day is. If I'm doing schoolwork, then I'll spend doing research for whatever paper I have to write. Or if I'm just wasting time, I'll go online, watch a movie, watch a video, just try to waste time, pretty much.
Hello, and welcome to Ready to Net, an interactive roundtable focused on the challenges and opportunities that e-learning and information technology present to higher education. Today's program is titled Web 2.0 Comes to Campus. What is Web 2.0? Well, Wikipedia, what many would describe as a core Web 2.0 icon, reports that Web 2.0, and I'm quoting here, refers to a second generation of internet-based services, such as social networking sites, wikis, and communication tools, that all emphasize online and collaboration and sharing among users, end quote. There's also the much-touted network effect underway in Web 2.0. The more people on the network, the more valuable the network becomes. We certainly see evidence of the network effect with the exploding numbers of users and content contributors on sites such as YouTube, Wikipedia, Second Life, Flickr, MySpace, and Friendster, as well as LinkedIn and Dig, just to name a few. The notion of online collaboration and sharing among users would seem, or should seem, to resonate well with the campus community. But then again, 3 decades into the much discussed, and some might say much hyped, technology revolution in higher education, many in the campus community are understandably skeptical. Is Web 2.0 yet another wave of IT industry jargon? Or must attention be paid to this much described shift in control from provider to user? What does it mean for colleges and universities to harness network effects to enhance campus resources and services and to improve student learning opportunities? While many college students spend time on YouTube, MySpace, and Second Life, corporations are taking a much broader look at Web 2.0 as a way to transform IT resources and services. So let's ask, do the corporate and consumer market conversations about Web 2.0 apply to higher education? If so, in what ways? Involving what costs? And with what benefits for students, faculty, and institutions, and the instructional mission of colleges and universities? Our program today has 2 segments. We'll begin with a conversation about Web 2.0 in the consumer and corporate sectors. Our panelists in this first segment represent firms that provide IT products and services to the education community, firms that are watching the Web 2.0 experience carefully in order to bring these resources and services to their campus clients. Our second segment will be a conversation among individuals from the campus community who, like their corporate counterparts, have also been watching and thinking about the role of Web 2.0 for higher education. I'm pleased to welcome to Ready to Net our panel members for this first segment. Mark Armstrong is the Vice President for Student Products at Oracle Corporation. Welcome, Mark. Jim Edmonds is the President of Ingenix. Jim, good to have you with us.
Thanks for being here.
Gordon Friedman is the Vice President for Education Strategy at Blackboard. Gordon, thank you for joining us. And Jim Pazinski is the Senior Director for Worldwide Education Strategy at Microsoft. Jim, again, thanks for joining us, and thank all of you for being with us today. So let's begin our conversation by watching the opening moment of Michael Wesch's video titled Web 2.0, The Machine is Us Using Us, Released on YouTube at the end of January 2007, it quickly became one of the most widely viewed videos on the web. Okay, panel, we've watched a little bit of the video. We've talked about some of these issues before our program today. Your firms each represent key points in the sort of digital terrain, if you will, of Web 2.0. Without disclosing any trade secrets, let's begin by asking each of you what you see as the key issue of Web 2.0 for your firms and for your campus clients. Mark, let me begin with you.
Great.
2.0 for Oracle?
Well, and for us, it's really about embracing the architecture of participation, as they say, and letting it inform our roadmap for product direction. Mm-hmm. So the question we get to is, how can we unlock a relatively complex application to enable our users to get at that rich data within the system. And that's through the delivery of a lot of standards-based services, as well as participating in the bodies that establish those standards, helping drive them and support them in any way we can. I think in terms of usability and interaction, it's really raising the bar. So as an application vendor, we need to meet that challenge, and it certainly is within our customer expectations. And I think long term we could have a whole nother discussion about software as a service and where in the context of student that should go, but that's a key component to us lowering the cost of upgrades, of compliance, of maintenance, which is, as you know, is very important in the higher education community.
Jim, Ingenious is involved in content management and other services about web-based media. What does Web 2.0 say as you look at the terrain and for your higher ed customers?
Right. Well, Ingenious makes web content management software. So for us, the paradigm is rooted in the traditional concept of enabling the few to publish to the many. Web 2.0 is blurring those distinctions and ultimately will eliminate all those distinctions. So as a company, for us the challenge is switch our paradigm, and we've been doing that and moving our application technologies to the live environment, to the runtime environment, and out of the development environment. I think for our customers, it's not only a technology paradigm shift. Sure, they need to buy the tools that's going to allow them to enable their users to author and create content on the runtime. They're going to have a conceptual shift too. They've been focused on controlling the process. Now they have to open that process up, and that's going to be a big shift for them.
Gordon, opening up the process. Many of our users are very familiar with Blackboard. Many are probably Blackboard users at campuses across the country. We think about faculty members publishing to the web, and yet Web 2.0 is about users publishing back. What is the message of Web 2.0 for Blackboard?
Well, Blackboard's commitment, Casey, is really to student success. I mean, we have to do that to help institutions and to help students move forward. Web 2.0 for us is looking at how you remove friction from the communication between the instructor and the student, and then on the backside, how the institution can learn what everybody's doing and they can report it up the ladder. So student success, reducing friction, making things move faster and quicker for all sides in the education.
And Jim, at Microsoft, which is on a lot of our systems, and certainly all of us across the campus community use Microsoft products probably in one way or another. The message of Web 2.0 for Microsoft is, as you look at the needs of the campus community?
I think, Casey, if we look at this now, most students are driving the use of blogs and wikis, but if you look on the corporate side of it, what most corporations are doing are trying to capture the organizational intelligence and be able to communicate and collaborate with that. So for example, prior to coming here, I used one of our SharePoint sites to go out and search on Web 2.0 and got a plethora of documents from all over the world. Something, if I didn't have these Web 2.0 assets available to me, I wouldn't be able to be as prepared for today.
Okay. I want to move on, and we try to stay away from technical questions and code and acronyms, but we need to circle back to one thing before we go farther. In a recent Harvard Business Review podcast, Don Tapscott, the author of Wikinomics, widely read book, says that a key factor in the emergence of Web 2.0 is the transition from HTML code to XML code. Many in our audience, many of us are civilians. We don't have MIT degrees. We don't do the stuff that's in the back rooms and sitting on the servers. But it'd probably be useful to put on decoder rings for a moment and begin to try to explain this for civilians. What does it really mean in this transition from HTML to XML? Jim, I'm going to put that one right in front of you.
Great. Well, I don't have an MIT degree, but I'll take a shot at it.
But you got the decoder ring.
The easiest way to describe it is HTML describes what content looks like. XML describes what content is. So HTML says, hi, I'm Times New Roman 14-point bold.
Okay.
XML says I'm a headline, I'm body copy, I'm an image. What that means for the web is you're unlocking content from its context. You're freeing it from its presentation, and now it can be used in all sorts of different distribution mechanisms. You can put it out as RSS, which is just a data feed for easily syndicating that content and making it searchable and discoverable in other places. Blogs and podcasts are basically a form of RSS. You can tag that content. You can put metadata and associate with that content. That's basically what a wiki is. So XML sort of becomes the foundation that enables this whole Web 2.0 social networking.
How much of a transition is that from again, just as you said, I think we could reference fonts to headlines? Is that a significant, is that a minor point?
I think it's a significant, significant transition.
Okay. Gordon, let's go back to Blackboard. Course management systems widely used across campuses, not all classes. you talked about student success. Let's push on that a little bit. What's the real message of Web 2.0? If we think about the traditional faculty classroom and course structure, it's the provider pushing out.
Yeah.
My faculty member, I'm the faculty member putting out a syllabus, and yet we're now talking about user-provided content.
Well, let me also address this last question a little bit, because I see XML, and I think the company does, is digital DNA, right?
Okay.
It's going to tell a document, a person, or something else who belongs to what. Now all of a sudden, going to your point, at Blackboard, when we want to make it easier for that student to communicate, we look at all the tools, all the Web 2.0 tools, and we say, how can we wrap something around that so that these aren't floating in space, but they become useful to the instructional content and useful to the institution in assessing what it's doing. So I look at 2.0 and XML really is the new language. We've been working in documents and files. We're now going to move to a medium. And our job at Blackboard really is to capture and help manage that so it's not floating in cyberspace.
Working to a medium. Jim, Microsoft has been adding a lot of collaborative tools over time to the evolution of Office in terms of people working together, documents from desktops to the web. Where does 2.0 take Microsoft? I'm drawing your experience both at Microsoft, you're a former faculty member. Where is, again, for all of us who are using Microsoft products in one way or another, the corporate experience, what against that underlying message, or what's the trajectory of that message?
Right. Well, I think the thing that I learned from being in higher ed as well as at Microsoft is that you have to make the tools accessible and easy to use for folks. If they have to use a new methodology, a new tool, the adoption is going to be much slower.
Right.
But, so for example, in Microsoft Word, we've added the ability to post straight to your blog. So you don't have to use a different tool for that. It means faculty members are going to be able to access this and utilize this. For example, being able to put, I saw recently where a college has their grants administration on a SharePoint site, but they use Outlook for workflow to send it around. An interface they understand, they know, they can use readily right the day it comes out.
Okay. Let's go to wikis, key element of the world of Web 2.0 and everything else. The Pew Internet Life, a report issued earlier this month, reports that a third of adult internet users, fully 36%, are using what they call, quote, the citizen-generated online encyclopedia, Wikipedia, and on a typical day in winter 2007, in the last couple of months, fully 8% of American adult users at one point or another touched Wikipedia on any given day. And those numbers no doubt would have been higher if they'd used a population 12 to 18 as opposed to just 18 and over. This is an incredible phenomenon. It's certainly created new business models and killed some old ones. We think about the Encyclopedia Britannica and some others. What do we do with Wikipedia in higher ed? Oracle's a database company.
That's right.
Or at least the roots of Oracle are a database company, Mark.
Well, and higher ed is interesting. We could end up with a sort of a dichotomy there because it's both open and hierarchical.
Right.
And as in higher ed, publishing is not just a hobby. It's a high stakes core activity of the institution. From our standpoint, what we're most interested in is understanding why Wikipedia works so well. What is it about the software? Why hasn't it sort of devolved under this load of activity and is actually producing pretty good content? And how can we understand that at a core level and let that again inform our designs around software and self-service?
Well, certainly we're seeing beyond the civilian Wikipedia on the websites, we're seeing wiki applications in a lot of places. I hear stories, for example, of sales representatives who share collective knowledge from the field because they don't want to route through corporate. There's stories that are coming out of Iraq of field officers who are creating wikis to share information at the moment, so again, it doesn't have to go up and down the command and control through the military. How do you integrate this back in what's going on campuses, Jim, in terms of, again, the wiki phenomenon and the wiki culture and the need, again, for the command and control over authenticity of content?
Right. It's definitely a paradigm shift from command control to opening that up. It's really a process change so that the interesting story to me is Wikipedia in its initial incarnation as Newpedia, where it had a formal evaluation process, and when they opened that up, the explosion in content. And I think what higher ed's looking at is a huge extension of their IP and building the tools that are going to enable that on campus and being able to control that in some kind of managed process.
Gordon, IP, all the stuff that faculty members push into Blackboard, my syllabus, my added value of the things that I've aggregated? Are we going to see faculty members creating their own wikis?
Oh, it's happening all the time right now. Both faculty and student wikis. And wikis are becoming an incredibly important educational tool because you're getting cooperation from students working on projects jointly and then arguing and agreeing on a document that comes out, and the document's in motion. So we see it as very valuable. We have a number of what we call our building blocks hooked up to various wiki programs. It's a fast-growing part of the campus, and Blackboard, again, is able to put a framework around it so it's educationally significant.
Let's go on to another part of Web 2.0, Second Life. Some of us are having enough trouble dealing with the first one and managing the life that we have on screen in one dimension. Second Life is taking off. We see a growing corporate presence, sometimes closed, sometimes open. Comments about people are essentially recreating in Second Life what they're doing in the first life and maybe doing it wrong, maybe doing it right. What do universities do with Second Life in this context? Jim, let me kind of keep moving across the table.
I think that anywhere students are, we need to go and we need to look at.
Yeah.
Facebook, for example, Second Life, for example. But I think it needs to be appropriate use of it. I think there are some things that residential colleges, face-to-face faculty and students, that still needs to be upheld and utilized. So we need to appropriately use Second Life.
But Mark, Oracle's got lots of corporate clients who are moving into Second Life. Is there something that other parts of Oracle are learning from the experience of their corporate clients that translates into higher ed? I'm not asking for trade secrets, but sort of at the top level.
Well, I think a lot of the things that are driving the corporate world to embrace Second Life are true, in fact, for higher education. I mean, it is about gaining mind share, and if you have a presence on Second Life, it can result in matriculation or continuing ed enrollment. To put it in its most crass terms, a revenue stream, and that's, of course, again, very important, increasingly important to higher education.
Are Linden dollars the next euro? Linden dollars the currency of the of Second Life? How many? Any of you have avatars on Second Life? You've got an avatar.
I have children on it.
You have children on Second Life?
I think the thing that I worry about, Casey, is that the students that we are looking at communicating with within Second Life, I'm not sure we're the best to understand how to communicate with them inside Second Life. It's the 18 to 24-year-olds that should probably be designing our Second Life spaces.
This is like the notion you have to have a 14-year-old in your house to do user support for any kind of technology product? Gordon?
Let me tell you why I think it's important. We're moving from a text-based society, and I think what we're going to find is that text was a piece and a technology that was useful for us for a long time. We're moving away from it. So how does somebody understand context? How do they learn a bigger picture? So I think there are aspects of Second Life that are quite useful and need to be looked at and actually studied more, and the same with the other tools. I think it's an important development and we should pay close attention to it.
What would be some of those other tools? We're talking about blogging, vlogging, video blogs.
Well, let's carry this one step further. I think you're finding that institutions and the way they structure things aren't working for kids. Kids are about workarounds.
Yeah, but wait, let me stop this for a moment. We spend in higher education an inordinate amount of time talking about the next wave of the net gens, 18 to 22-year-olds. By head count, they're 22% of our population. If we look at almost every sector based on the demography of higher education, it's still the case in almost every sector, under 50% of the head count. 48% in traditional four-year colleges and universities, and much lower in other segments, are students over age 22. Are we kind of front-loading all our attention about leading wave and not paying attention to other populations? Jim?
I think we have to a great deal of extent. Those are not the average student anymore. So I think the students in the community colleges and those older students are ones that we need to start taking a look at. And I think that's where a lot of the Web 2.0 tools should be taken into consideration, because they want distance learning, they want asynchronous learning, and that's what some of these tools provide.
So in one sense, part of the Web 2.0 is the carryover of the consumer and the corporate experience to campus. That in fact all this is going on. Why isn't it happening at Acme College or Acme State College? Are you hearing that from some of your corporate clients, from your campus clients, Mark?
We are, and I think there's the jury's still out in some areas, but the reality of today's economics and as our customers look down the road 10 years, they understand that cost effectiveness needs to drive some pretty significant changes in behavior, or they literally will go out of business.
Yeah. And what about managing all the richness of the media and the IP? I think Gordon said IP, Jim. That comes back to some of the content management issues.
I want to sort of circle back this whole idea of the focusing on the 18 to 24-year-old market versus the older. One of the reasons we focus on the 18 to 24-year-old market is because they're driving the dynamic. I never text messaged before a couple years ago, but my kids forced me into text messaging. And the tools and the techniques that we're using now are really being driven by that demographic.
But we have lots of demographics, not just that one 18 to 22-year-old. Does it matter? Are we spending? Is the focus on the assumption that this 18 to 20-year-old population is wired?
Casey, we're followers at this point.
Okay, fair enough.
And I would follow up and say that not only that, we have a tremendous student engagement problem in this country. Blackboard did a study. We talked to 50 presidents last year. That's their number one problem. they're going to have to communicate with this 18 and 24-year-old group because they do make the bulk up. Now, the institution on the flip side, if you have a lot of adult learners, you need to go to them with what works for them too. So there's an additional burden on institutions that know how to communicate with different constituencies.
Let me switch a little bit. We need to talk about money. Earlier this month, EDUCAUSE released its annual survey of CIOs, current issues. Top of the item for CIOs in all sectors was money. Money's coming back after some significant budget cuts. What's it going to cost to do Web 2.0? This isn't something that's, other costs are going to go down, it's going to come in. Jim, what's it going to cost a campus to do Web 2.0?
Well, I think it really depends on what you're going to use. I mean, there are a certain number of services that technology companies such as ours are giving away. I mean, Soapbox, where you can put your videos up there for free. A lot of the blogging software is for free. So I think when you get into more of the organizational infrastructure, that's where it's going to cost to put in those SharePoint servers, Exchange servers, etc.
Training of people?
Absolutely, but that's a good point because I'm seeing a lot of faculty put these 5-minute videos up and staff members orientation. Very inexpensive, low-cost training production.
Mark, ERP on 2.0 in an ERP environment in terms of the kinds of information systems that Oracle provides to higher ed, the 2.0 extension. If I'm doing a strategic plan that says 3 to 5 years, where do I want to be to catch up with consumer?
Well, and I mean, I think we typically turn around and ask what's important to the institution, and how important is the social interaction versus some of the other potentially strategic things. In terms of the timeline, what's interesting is we're seeing those timelines for implementations now all over the map. One of our largest customers, Arizona State University, is doing things in months that some customers are doing in years. Now, in each of those cases, there's a strategic imperative behind it driving that behavior. But you start to see this bifurcation as people really decide, this is important for this institution. This is where we need to be, not in 2 years, but in 6 months.
Let's talk hard dollars, because the campus folks, ultimately, it's going to come out of somebody's budget. If I'm thinking of Web 2.0 for a medium-sized institution of 5,000 to 10,000 students, am I looking at $50,000, $100,000, $500,000? I realize you're not doing plans, you're not offering contracts, you're not going to be held accountable for this when representatives of your various firms go elsewhere. But what do I need to think about if I'm thinking about money and time to get kind of a reasonable campus strategy for Web 2.0 off and going? Jim?
I don't know what the numbers are, but I think you need to be thinking about basic infrastructure. There has to be a huge investment in authentication because now you're managing 1, 2, 10, 20,000 transitory users each year. There has to be a huge investment in storage because content is going to explode. And in search
storage is cheap, right? In theory.
In theory,
In theory, it's the other stuff. Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, and I was just going to say in search as well.
Jim? What do you think, cost, time?
Well, I think the other Jim stated it correctly. I think there's a significant amount of infrastructure that needs to go in, and then your study itself shows that not enough campuses do formal strategic planning. So I think the first step is them really doing that strategic planning 5 years out.
So this is not the Nike strategy, which many campuses use for a lot of IT, just do it and then think about it afterwards. This is do the plan first.
Absolutely not.
Do the plan first.
And understanding how it fits in the pedagogy.
Gordon?
I would say this is an issue where the CIO has to be sitting down with the president and possibly trustees and looking at their infrastructure, because this may be a more important investment than any building they put up. And by the way, we're probably the
building in First Life or Second Life?
Well, in any life.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, great. We actually are at a point we've got to bring this segment to a close, but I want to give you each a chance to make either affirm a comment you made, go someplace else, but a last chance at a comment about the whole corporate experience translating into the campus expectation about Web 2.0. Mark, let me begin with you.
Okay, well, I think I'm going to echo what I started with in talking about the architecture of participation, where we intend to focus on the architecture so we can enable the participation in the campus community. What's interesting at Oracle, while the higher ed customer segment is a relatively small percentage of the overall footprint, our user group is the second largest of any Oracle user group, and we work with them very interactively. So a lot of the ideas around Web 2.0 are not only in the DNA of our customers, but in the DNA of our higher ed organization, Oracle, and I think that's making a huge difference.
Jim, last quick comment?
I'm going to echo something that Gordon said, which is basically that this is really a cultural shift, and there needs to be a big strategic effort on campuses to bring in the CIO, the various constituencies on campus, and plot out how you're going to change, the basic content management infrastructure on campus.
Great. Gordon, last quick comment.
This is part of the transition and transformation for higher ed, and I think the planning process, again, I would echo, very strategic level, needs to be engaged now so that we bring students along and we also use them to help us know where we're going.
Student employment opportunities. Jim Pazinski, a last quick closing comment. You get the last word.
We tend to focus on the blogs and the wikis, the things the digital natives, the students are pulling us in with. I think that the real return on investment is going to be the corporate intelligence inside the university, being able to share information, store it, gather it, and then find the information.
Things in theory that should be structural to the campus community, but not always are. Great. My thanks to the four of you, Mark Armstrong, Gordon Freeman, Jim Edmonds, and Jim Pazinski, for providing us with an overview of some of these Web 2.0 issues. And we're going to take a short break. We're going to be back with some folks from the campus community who will, like their corporate counterparts, take a digital looking glass, offer a through the digital looking glass perspective on the meaning and impact of Web 2.0. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Ready to Net. In the second segment of our program today, we'll explore academic perspectives on Web 2.0. Is this just another cycle of IT spin, or is there really something there? I'm pleased to welcome to Ready to Net our panel members for this second segment. Gil Gonzalez is the CIO at Cal State Monterey Bay. Welcome, Gil. Sandra Rottenberg is the Access Service Librarian at Solana Community College. Sandra, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Richard Pickett is CIO at San Diego State University. Rich, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And Alan Levine is the CTO, Chief Technology Officer and Vice President for Community at the New Media Consortium. Alan, again, welcome.
Thank you.
And welcome to all of you. All right, panel, so you've had an opportunity to hear our first group, people with a corporate perspective on Web 2.0, discuss the meaning and impact of Web 2.0 and how that may translate to higher ed. Let's begin with the key question from a campus perspective. What is Web 2.0 and why should we care? And Rich, I'm going to let you lead us into that terrain.
Okay, thank you. I guess in terms of higher education as organizations, they're different than corporate environments, obviously. We have a corporate phase or area of our university that deals with all the administrative, business, financial systems, human resources. And then we also have the operational dealing with academics. So really, when you talk about how to use Web 2.0 or how it impacts the university, you're looking at different components. So if you take from the administrative side, then you're looking at what's the value to the university of Web 2.0.
No value of a president blogging?
Yeah, it depends.
Yeah,
I mean, if you
depends
look
on
at
the president.
that, yes,
Yeah.
yes. And so you look at Web 2.0, and a lot of times for those applications that we purchase and solutions that are packaged, provided by vendors, we have no choice. We either move along with them or if it's a forced march.
Yeah.
And so we have to be prepared for that because we can only stay on certain technology so long and still have it supported. So for us, I think it offers a lot of value as we move forward with interaction with our systems. Because now what we're talking about, as earlier was mentioned in the earlier section about 2.0 being participation from a business perspective, that participation now, those silos are across more divisions, it's across other organizations outside of the university.
A lot of decentralization in terms of the implementation.
Exactly. And so now you may have had silos that were remediated by early ERP systems that we now have in place in a number of institutions. Now you have those silos that are across an organization, different organizational units, and now you have an opportunity to do more collaboration. And then the same thing on the academic side. What you're looking at is, as in the earlier section, you're talking about participation. Now we have more tools with Web 2.0 to facilitate that participation. And since higher education, our whole basis is participation and learning, this provides some additional tools. So we're looking forward to it. There's a cost to that, of course.
You're looking forward to Web 2? Alan, do you hear campuses saying they're looking forward to Web 2.0?
Everybody is.
Gil, you're also a CIO. I mean, how do you explain Web 2.0 to a president or a provost, a dean, and to sort of the non-techie civilian professors?
Well, before we start by talking about terms like wikis and blogs, Web 2.0 really is about putting the student in the center, which is, a lot of campuses talk about that, but in this case, they can produce their own content, they can distribute their own content, they can create affinity groups, they can collaborate. They're now in control of content in ways in which institutions aren't very comfortable. And it's not just in the classroom, it's everywhere. So the thing we talk about with presidents and provosts about Web 2.0 is we've talked about engaged organizations, engaged campuses, the need to collaborate. Well, these tools are pervasive. They're oftentimes free, freely distributed.
Right.
They ask IT organizations to get very uncomfortable and put them into our core systems.
Yeah.
We have to build authentication tools for them. We have to do other things. But at the end of the day, it improves students working with other students. For faculty that embrace that type of instruction, it improves how they teach sometimes.
Sandra, we talked in the other segment a little bit about this lag between where campuses are as opposed to the consumer and corporate experience. How far behind is higher education? I realize different segments and different campuses. Are we 6 months, a year, 2 years behind the kind of deployment of broadly defined Web 2.0? We're sort of getting Web 2.0 for higher ed?
I think we're pretty behind. I mean, I think that most of the higher ed bureaucracies are finding it very tough to move fast enough to keep up with Web 2.0. I think that's a kind of a catchphrase for a lot of different technologies that are moving really fast.
Yeah.
I mean, Info Island on Second Life was built in just a few months, and it's huge. And getting all of the different...
We're going to come back and talk very, very specifically about Second Life. But Rich, is this issue behind, is it about money? Is it about the fact that higher ed is risk aversive? Is it about a sense of command and control over a culture even though we're highly decentralized? Or is it just because we haven't gotten it yet and others have?
Well, I think in some ways we are ahead, I guess. And if I look from an academic perspective in particular, is that there are pockets of individuals on campuses in communications courses, English courses, other courses, education, that really have embraced that. At least that's what we've seen at our campus, because it's a more natural progression for them to go into some of these new technologies, especially, let's say, like this, our School of Education. In fact, the way they're looking at marketing to students is they said we need to have a YouTube presence. We need to have that just so we can keep up with folks. On an administrative side, it's a little bit different because I think it's a little harder to justify some of the returns on investments.
Yeah. Sandra, let's circle back. In the previous segment, we talked about wikis, and I'm going to come back to that as well, particularly for librarians. Some of the work that you do, the concern is that students go to the web. We all go to the web.
We all go to the
wiki. There's a huge proportion of traffic, apparently, according to the Pew Internet Life, that not only people using it, 8% of adult users on any given day, but also about, I guess, 50%, according to Pew, of the referrals to wiki come from Google, according to some recent numbers as well. This is different. This creates the issue of authenticity, faculty complaint. This is the new version of the World Book, except it's digital and perhaps even less authenticated in terms of students doing research. What do we need to understand about wikis?
Well, I think you just basically explained what you need to understand about wikis is that they can change. But I don't think wikis are a bad tool. They're actually a pretty useful tool in the same way that the encyclopedias were, but they're just not research. I mean, they're a great way to log in and get a quick overview, check out some references, get a little bit of an understanding on a topic before you move into your research. And I think actually most students are pretty much using it like that, at least most students who have any understanding of what the research process is like.
And Alan, what about campus wikis? Or essentially a campus or a department or a research group building its own wiki?
Oh, tons of them. It's really, for many places, it's a real simple content system to create and connect content. It's not having to learn HTML. It's not having to learn a complex system. It's type in a box. It's easy to link to other references, and it's a really powerful tool, not necessarily for always creating end content, but for brainstorming, for planning, for doing drafts. I have a colleague who's a CIO, and he refuses to read anything that people will send him as an email attachment. He wants it on the wiki so he can see the content so it can be shared. That's a powerful statement.
Well, let me then come back to Rich and Gil. The decentralized environments, departments, units, groups putting up wikis on a campus network creates issues of concern about security, authenticity. Rich?
I guess
Are you not worried about wikis the way you worry about other things?
I'm not worried about wikis as much. There are more concerns for me from applications that are going to share administrative data, for example. I look at the wikis, the blogs, that's a free form of communication, and we really want to have that open to people because that's what we thrive on, is that interaction in higher education. On administrative systems, those are the things that are the biggest concerns. Gil and I were talking earlier about security and other issues that pop up because now all of a sudden you don't have control where it comes, or what people may do with the data because it may interact with systems that are in another department or on another campus or at another organization. So some of those issues I worry about. But the wikis, the blogs, the YouTube, all the other media, I think those are just great environments for for the academic portions of our university.
Gil, then, so wikis and blogs and video blogging and these services at campuses that should not only, if you will, tolerate but actively support for students and faculty?
Absolutely. In fact, those are great tools to engage participation. And part of what we do in higher education oftentimes is invite engagement and participation, not only among staff, but among faculty and students. So it's actually great. They're great governance tools.
Yeah.
You actually know what's going on. You can see where the threads are going. You can see who's participating. These are tools that help organizations that really want to promote governance models that are inclusive. They're very powerful because as well as they work on the internet for affinity relationships, they work great for organizations. So we're very excited about rolling those into our tool set and make them available to our organizations. The part that I'm also worried about, though, is it creates a way for us to talk about internal communication and external communication. Those are the types of issues that we're now struggling with because we now have internal wikis and external wikis because they're serving different purposes. And
Well, you may have proliferation of internal wikis, couldn't you?
Absolutely.
Lots of departments, research groups, student affinity groups.
The same with e-portfolios,
Yeah.
the same with blogs. I mean, these tools are easily replicable and they're very effective.
Are they costly to support?
Yes, there's a cost to support them. They're costly in some ways because we've not thought of them as ERP systems, but yet our users think of them that way. They become part of the core. And in terms of supporting them, we have to add new skill sets to organizations sometimes. We don't have those skills embedded, so we have to add them in. So the first wave, the first disruptive activity they cause requires us to shift our priorities. That's healthy. It's about change.
But do they have to live on your campus? I mean, the free, the wiki spaces, PBWiki, these externally hosted ones are really powerful feature sets.
Absolutely. It depends on where you want to place it. And back to Rich's comment about security. If in fact you're going to put something that is strategic, say for example, and is used for decision support, having it on a public wiki isn't really maybe the right place to put it.
Yeah, but isn't this a little bit like the proliferation to some degree also of campus affiliated websites? That if somebody puts up a website and a wiki that in some way suggests or leaves open for easy inference, this is an Acme College endorsed or affiliated website. Isn't this as much of, whether for CIO or for others on a campus concerned about affiliation, liability, command and control as well, much as a server on a campus network? Rich?
I think it's the same thing. If a faculty member or student or anybody within your domain sets up a page, there's always a capability or potential that there may be information that's damaging to the university. Same thing as a wiki. I don't think you're going to be able to control it. I mean, at larger universities, we have somewhere close to 20,000 web pages. We can't be controlling all of those, nor can we really have an opportunity or need to control what goes on some of the wikis.
Let's move to another part of Web 2.0 that we talked about with the first group, Second Life. Alan, I know New Media's doing a lot of work in that area. Sandra, actually interesting, I know that when we were putting the panel together, your EDUCAUSE bio is not a traditional photograph, but it's your Second Life avatar. I was reading recently in the Chronicle of Higher Education that there is now a Second Life silent auction to support a fund at Virginia Tech. We see corporations going to Second Life. We see lots of... Why should we care about Second Life? Sandra, why? What is this something that I don't get because I've got gray hair? Or
no, I think there are actually quite a few people with gray hair, myself included, that are on Second Life. I think you should care about...
Can I change my hair on Second Life?
Yes, you can. You can have a mohawk on Second Life.
I'm a dog in Second Life.
Are you?
Yeah?
We're not going there. I'm sorry.
Put on your red dress in Second Life. Let's see. I just... Second Life, in terms of distance ed, I think is really where the value is. I think with distance education, many universities and colleges are moving there. We have a really vibrant distance ed program at the college, and it's hard making it better than a correspondence course. No matter how many toys you drop in, no matter how many threaded discussions you have, no matter how quickly you answer your email, it's still all chat-based. Once you move into Second Life, for whatever reason, and I have yet to figure out that reason, there is an immediacy and a connection that happens between avatar and avatar that is very similar to what happens between people getting in around a table and chatting. There's visual cues, there's ways that you behave, there's things that there's gestures you can make, there's a sense of humor that comes into it that makes it easier to make those connections. And I think distance ed is one of those places where students and faculty alike are both desperate for some sense of community.
Alan, some of the work that New Media is doing under your leadership and guidance, what are some of the things that you're doing with Second Life, with New Media, the New Media Consortium, and the kinds of questions you're hearing from your members?
Right. Well, first of all, we don't really offer classes because we're an organization and we have members who are doing that. So some of our first efforts were just organizing events and trying to understand what it was like to meet in this space, to have get-togethers in this space, to have informal gatherings and formal gatherings.
Right.
We've had some large-scale presentations. Howard Rheingold did a keynote for us last October. We've done some things with the art community. So it's really so early in this. It's, you know, Gil, when you and I were at Maricopa in the early 90s, we never thought we would be running our enterprise applications through this interface. And that took, you know, 5 or 6 years to really even get to be a possibility. And I think people are trying to look too quickly at Second Life. It is a really powerful social presence there. It's hard to define until you've spent some time there and had some rich interactions. And it's not the answer for everything. It's, you know, the first thought for a lot of institutions is to replicate. So teachers want to have PowerPoints. Campuses want to build replicas of their buildings. You know, there's a space for that. But as Stephen Downs noted yesterday, why do you need a ceiling on these buildings in Second Life? It never rains. It makes it hard to get in the building. You know, if you can fly, I prefer to fly out the ceiling. So it's really starting to get the people to expand their horizons, and mostly it's really powerful where we have the students creating, because that is the power of Second Life, that it's completely generated by the people there.
So some of the things that might be obvious carryovers from the corporate sector on sort of the marketing and exploration. Apparently some of the car companies are saying you won't, you know, the best thrill in life now is to experience, you know, whatever the car is on Second Life. Some of us like the smell of the actual car and the threat of the cop behind us, you know, waving us over if we're speeding. I'm not sure how that translates into Second Life. Maybe there's an analog to that, but this is more than just creating it, as you were saying, rebuilding the library, rebuilding the admissions office. Is that right, Sandra?
More than just recreating. I mean, it's sort of it's a chance to revision or envision what you want to do, what the core job of what your library or your class is for, and then create an environment in an ideal world. What would that environment look like? So you're not limited to a classroom with 17 rows. You're free to figure out what beach you want to be on and head there.
So Gil, with all this stuff, all these things that are the blogging, Second Life, the wikis, the YouTube, which some faculty like and find interesting, and others I suspect see as a great threat. If I were a faculty member, if I were having a bad day, I would really be scared that all of a sudden I've been YouTubed, and my bad moment in class is all of a sudden 15 minutes later up for the world to see, or somebody's even sliced and diced it in some other even ways to make it even less flattering. Where's the added value? How do we define the added value in this Web 2.0, the cloud of Web 2.0?
Well, I guess the first thing is we learn a whole lot about our students and a whole lot about our employees. And we learn about how they want to communicate and what environments they want to engage in. So, for example, if 90% of all students have cell phones, and they're using cell phones
right now, for what we hear from Student Monitor
for lots of things, the university ought to be thinking about ways in which we can communicate with them on their terms, within the envelope they want to create for themselves. Not because we think our current methods are bad, or because we think walking up to a registrar to enroll in a course is bad. It's if there are ways we can engage them and get them involved in our university community so they enroll, learn, graduate, be a part of our larger scope of influence, so to speak. We want that. We want them to be active participants so they can be successful.
I'm sorry. Oh, it's so easy with this stuff to judge the technology and its capability by what we're seeing. You know, the videos that you worry about. You know, how many soda bottles do we need to see explode? Until we start seeing some interesting content. I mean, the capability of the easy sharing, the easy replication. You know, YouTube is popular. Some people came out with a clone called TeacherTube. That's all educational content. Really fantastic. It's the same technology recast with hopefully some better content.
But still, you know, if I'm a dean, I'm a provost, I'm a president, I'm a professor, I have been through this in cycles before. I've been promised, you know, this, again, the so-called technology revolution in higher education that's now into its third decade. how do I find that added value for my classroom, my work, my department, my institution? Let's go to the registration, for example. And I'm not suggesting that, what would registration be like in a Second Life registration office as opposed to what I could do today? How will the admissions office, is that really defined? Am I going to carry this over? What's going to be the added value of that experience?
I think from the standpoint, for example, like Sandra was mentioning, right? When people communicate by email and chat, there is some personal contact, but it's also it's easier to flame people too when you can just write an email. When you have these avatars, or let's say, for example, the student registers, so they register and they register online, they do their courses, then they have questions. So this was all part of CRM, right? Customer relationship management. And so if now all of a sudden,
it's service.
Sure. So if you could go now when you have a question, go into Second Life, and there's a counselor that's an avatar, and they say, oh, by the way, and help you out, and you need to talk to your professor. So then you fly out of your building, like Alan said, with no roof, and you go over and you talk to your communications professor. So it helps them communicate and creates perhaps a stronger bond where all these other electronic technologies sometimes separate us. We can communicate by written word, but we don't have some of those other interactions.
Hearing a message that in one sense sounds strangely familiar, circling back to Neighbor's notion about high tech versus high touch. And is it the case that you're all saying in one sense that Second Life gives us a high tech version of high touch?
Yes.
Where in the past we used to think of them, or at least they were originally defined as being in conflict with one another, kind of a reaction? Is that consensus of the group?
It could. I wouldn't. I mean, Second Life is easy. It's interesting right now. I'm thinking, when I register for Biology 101, the screen comes up and says, I've seen you register for Biology 101.
Right.
Other people have taken this, also taken, the whole Amazon recommendation system. Would be wonderful to be able to sort of network these individual acts of registering for classes the same way Web 2.0 allows us to personally organize our photos or our websites and gain something at an organizational level by combining and aggregating.
But also doing basic things. I'm going to register, so I know that I have textbooks I have to procure. And I want to actually see some of the lectures of the professor. I want to see a map of the campus. I want to know how I'm going to get around.
I can sample the goods.
I can Web 1 was aggregation. Web 2 is about syndication. So I want those on my terms. I want to be able to control the information that is appropriate for me, given where I am and what I'm doing at any given time. Whether it's knowing that there's an emergency on campus or knowing there's a new book in the library that is perfect for my research. How can the institution communicate that with me so that, again, I feel engaged? It's part of making sure students understand and I hope realize that they are at the center of the institution's success.
How do campuses and departments go about the planning for Web 2.0? There seemed to be an agreement with the previous panel from a corporate perspective that the campus community is lagging behind consumer and corporate deployment of the Web 2.0 broadly defined. Although, Rich, you seem to disagree with that a little bit. But let me, is this one of these things where we just do it and then do the planning later? Do we need to plan first but not plan in academic time? Accelerate what is often the long, some might say, drawn-out quest for consensus about a plan before we go to it. Rich?
I think in some areas, universities have led the way in a number of these things. When we look
specifically?
Well, if you look at Wikipedia's, you look at, in fact, a lot of the technology that we have now, whether it's YouTube, et cetera, we're from students, recent graduates. So this isn't people who've traditionally been in the corporate environment. Google's been snapping up companies. In fact, their own company is by people who are recent graduates or students. And so I think the education is ahead of the game in many areas. The question is when you have a campus with 35,000 students in our case and thousands of courses, you can't move everybody at once, and there may be areas that it's not applicable. So I think we're trying on the academic side and trying to reinvent ourselves and trying to keep up. And who knows? I mean, now we're at Web 2.0. How long will this last? What will be the next instantiation of these concepts? A number of the things we'll see, the technologies will go away. The concepts may stay, but a number of companies and technology we use today will be gone in 2, 3, 4 years.
And what's it going to cost? I mean, because ultimately, two of you are CIOs, library budgets. I mean, everything in the higher ed landscape certainly suffered significant budget hits through the last recession. And in some cases they were year cuts, sometimes mid-year rescissions. The compounding effect of that, particularly on a lot of the technology and library issues, were significant. And then now all of a sudden, here's a new technology stream, here's a new technology path, here's a new technology buzz. How do we deal with some of these costs? Alan, what's a campus do with the cost?
Oh, you gave me the tough question.
I gave you the tough question.
Not being on a campus.
Well, you work as a consultant, so you don't have to be on the campus, right? You get to escape to Second Life after you've answered.
I don't think it's. I mean, you're obviously putting money into it, but you're not going to say you're spending X on Web 2.0 like it's a product.
Yeah.
And I think where we really come short in education is doing our R&D and doing the development and innovation.
Yeah.
So maybe we don't have to be buying so much as integrating with the wave of technology that's evolving out there, making sure things that we're using and buying integrate, talk, use the APIs, communicate, let us get data out that we put the data into.
But Gil, and you got to answer this one quickly. When you say when you say a new technology to a president, Rich, you guys are CIOs. President said, "What's it going to cost? Money's got to come from someplace."
Well, what we do is we know we're spending money on technology now.
Yeah.
We're working with vendors who are trying to embed technology that solve our problems. So we're trying to guide them to solve them in these new ways. The second thing is we're running pilots. We're running examples of how we think systems work, because we've got to make sure that in fact they get adopted within our culture. And the third thing is we have to partner. It's creating. Web 2.0 is forcing us, whether we didn't like to do it before, it's forcing us to work in ways with other institutions, force us to work with
forcing that collaboration in new ways.
It absolutely is.
All right. You said campuses are running pilots. We're actually running out of time, so that's a bad segue to say I'm going to give you each a last opportunity to make one very quick, very closing comment. Alan, we're going to start at your end of the table. Last thought about Web 2.0?
It's really blurring. I mean, we tend to think that we do things in a silo as education, and we're thinking about just the education. And obviously the pressures for this is coming from outside, and we have to really think about our communities and, as others have said, about what our students are doing. So be prepared for these lines to be blurred about what people do on campus and off campus.
Rich, last quick comment.
I just think that for us to be competitive with our students and other campuses, is we need to comply. We need to continue to move forward and evolve technology, and it's just a cost of doing business.
Sandra, quick comment.
I think that Web 2.0 is going to increase our opportunities for flexibility and increase the rewards for flexibility. So perhaps.
And Gil, last quick comment.
My last one is, I guess, that Web 2.0 is very disruptive, and it's very healthy for organizations that are really trying to change. So we got to be looking at embracing important parts of it in our everyday life.
Great. All right. Well, my thanks to the four of you, to Gil Gonzalez from CSU Monterey Bay, Alan Levine of the New Media Consortium, Rich Pickett of San Diego State University, and Sandra Rottenberg from Solano Community College. Two, our thanks to the folks at KTEH San Jose Public Television for hosting this program today. And we also want to thank the corporate sponsors of this Ready2Net program, Adobe Systems, Blackboard, Nginx, and Microsoft. For all of us at Ready2Net, we hope you found this program to be useful and informative. You'll find additional information and resources about Web 2.0 on the Ready2Net website, www.csumb.edu/ready2net. Please plan to join us on June 1st for our next Ready2Net program on community broadband, broadcast live from Monterey, California, and the annual WeTech conference. Also, please mark your calendar for our June 14th program on the future of libraries, titled Libraries, Coffee, and Surfing. You'll find information about these programs, plus the video archives of all past Ready2Net programs on our website. And for all of us at Ready2Net today, thank you for joining us. Very good, folks. We had a good time. The third and final segment of today's Ready2Net program will focus on moving e-learning from unique to ubiquitous. Given that their titles, our panel members for this third segment should have some very interesting perspectives on this issue. I'm pleased to welcome Gil Gonzalez, who is the CIO at California State University, Monterey Bay. Susan Mitros, who was with us in the first segment, again, who is Deputy CIO and Executive Director for e-learning at Ohio State. Matthew Patinsky is the co-founder and chairman of Blackboard. And John Welty is the president of the California State University at Fresno. My thanks to the four of you for joining us. John, I want to begin this segment with you. You are our college president, so you're speaking on behalf of your 4,000 plus colleagues. And in one sense, as I think about my conversations with college presidents over the last several years about e-learning, I hear several messages. I get a sense of great pride and enthusiasm in terms of what they see going on their campuses and the work of their students and their faculty. I hear a little bit of angst and uncertainty about what many sense is this black hole of technology costs and the continuing demand for resources. It's not like putting up a building. The demand never ends. And I also hear a little bit of what I would characterize as a kind of befuddlement, if you will, that there's a level, and I'm not suggesting this of you or any of your colleagues necessarily in the Cal State. I want to be very careful about that, but there's some out there who are just personally uncomfortable with all this, the way many of our parents are uncomfortable with our kids, working with their computers in their back bedrooms. If let's assume for a moment that my summary may in some way be partially accurate. I'm putting a lot of unnecessary qualifiers there. What is it that you and your colleagues as presidents and provosts confront in this movement or the effort to take e-learning from unique to ubiquitous? What's the role of presidential leadership?
Well, it's a very complex time, and I think it's probably a time in which leadership is extremely important. The key, I think, is to ask the question, is the use of technology improving access, is it improving learning, and is it reducing costs? And frankly, we've lost sight of some of those as we get involved in this, because there's been the tendency, I think, to add on and not change how we're doing things. And so I think our challenge as we look forward is really one in which can we, in fact, use technology to improve access, reduce our costs, and improve learning. And some would say that's impossible. I believe one of the fundamental errors that we've made is that we've not invested enough in faculty to give them the time to create new learning environments and new ways to use technology. We tend just to release them and say, you make something different, but it's not adequate time, and it's a financial model very different than the past. You have to invest up front if you want to get results, I think.
Susan, your take? You are the director of e-learning at Ohio State, the movement from unique to ubiquitous?
We have to become activists. And I think we all started out, as I look across the audience here, we probably can all tell stories of our first course management system that sat on a desktop, probably underneath our desk, and ran on a small machine, and suddenly we're surprised when we're asking our leadership for millions of dollars to put in these enterprise-level systems, and we have no champions, because we have never really nurtured or cultivated that type of championship in our universities. One thing we have to do is make sure that e-learning is woven and part of our academic plans, and that's up to us to make those conversations start, because they're not going to happen elsewhere. And we really have to move and think about these academic systems as being as important and as meaningful as the administrative systems we put in. The CIO at Ohio State University has often said that nobody comes to Ohio State because we have a great payroll system. But at the same time, it's difficult for me to make arguments for e-learning when I'm up against that type of spending.
And Gil, CSU Monterey is a young campus. It's barely 10 years old, roughly. Used to be a military base, turned into a campus. The campus was founded with an explicit mission about student-centered learning and implicitly, and perhaps explicitly as well, about technology-enabled student-centered learning. In theory, none of the legacy issues that confront many other institutions, and I say in theory, I want to be careful there, should not have been much of an issue at Monterey. But in reality, how has this worked out in practice?
Well, actually, we're one of 23 other universities in a very large system, so we're the anomaly or the exception in some cases. But after I've said that, the value of how technology works at Monterey Bay is more about how it fits with the outcomes-based learning model the institution has established. We have common outcomes and common learning requirements. Those are articulated and infused across all programs. Connecting technology to that and making it fit in a way so that faculty understand and students understand that those tools and services are available to them at their discretion is one strategy. The other strategy is that learning occurs in many places in different ways, so it's not even just about what's happening on campus. Being on an old Army base means we have to deploy systems and services up north at Elkhorn Slough or south of Big Sur or in the city of Monterey. So our profile thinking about learning has to support different places, different locations, different modes of delivery, different languages, different methods of delivery, and we have to be accountable to that from an IT perspective. So the great experiment is really research in progress. And it's really more about thinking about how these things are woven together, not from a top-down mandate, but from almost a discipline-oriented architecture that faculty agree to now. They're not arguing about whether historians should be using technology. They're arguing about how best to teach. And that's the engagement we want to have.
All right. Matthew, the easy question for me to ask you would be, what's the corporate role in supporting e-learning? But I'm not going to do that. I want to come to the other part of your life, because at least some of us know you're also a doctoral student at Columbia. So in one sense, you have this through the looking glass experience, if you will, in terms of the activities of Blackboard as a successful e-learning company, and then your experience at Columbia as a doctoral student. What's the gap essentially between practice and promise? And I'm not asking you necessarily to give away secrets about Columbia, but in one sense, you're seeing things up close and personal in a way that must be very interesting.
It is. I feel at the same time both great opportunity as well as great frustration. So in terms of great opportunity, I'm actually at Teachers College within Columbia, and a lot of the issues that people at Teachers College care about, access to education, the quality of education, equity in education, efficiency in education, those are challenges that I think e-learning technology can really offer something to help meet. It's not the universal solvent, and that's where cynicism comes in when people claim it is the universal solvent, but it certainly has an important role to play in the right context. But where the frustration comes in, and probably the lesson I've learned most by being actually a student using the technologies, is just how disempowering they are. Universities are so much more focused on technologies that help you teach and not technologies that help you learn.
That's a very interesting distinction.
Yeah, and to give you just a quick example, in my life, and I think this has to do with the ubiquitous notion, in my life as a doctoral student, which is unique from an undergraduate student, I engage the library. And yet the library doesn't know who I am. It doesn't know the courses I'm in and their resources. I use JSTOR every day. It doesn't remember anything about that. It doesn't know the databases as a sociologist I would care about. I engage my other doctoral students in the cohort. Yet there's almost no technologies that are out there for that kind of community building as a cohort. I connect with the colleagues in my discipline that my faculty member knows, yet I don't know really who he knows, even though those technologies exist. And I collect data studying for 8th grade science classes. And yet I do that all in paper. The data is not available to my colleagues, the interview notes. And I didn't even mention the course. I think going ubiquitous is about going beyond the course. It's recognizing that universities need to invest in network learning and scholarly environments that really are based on the way that faculty members and students experience that role, not just the processes and the functions.
Sidebar question. When Steve Wozniak, after Apple went public, went back to college at Berkeley, he registered under an assumed name. He didn't want to intimidate the faculty. Are you registered under your own name at TC?
I am.
All right, thanks. We talked in the last segment a bit about bring data. So let's look at one metric to help us understand the growing role of technology resources in the curriculum. These data come from the Campus Computing Project and document the rising use of course management system. Across all sectors of higher education, the percentage of courses using a CMS or a learning management system has more than doubled between 2000 and 2005. Now, admittedly, this is not a perfect indicator of the rising use of IT in the classroom or as part of the learning experience, particularly in the context, Matthew, of your point about teaching systems as opposed to learning resources. Some might look at these and say the data point to progress. Others would say they don't point to any real change, substantive change at all. In the role of technology as a supplement to the classroom. John, let me come back to you as our president on this panel. What's your assessment? Does this matter? Should we care? Do these data and other kinds of data point to progress, or are we looking at the right things or the wrong things? What should we be looking for as the kind of metrics we're being asked to present internally and to other audiences?
Well, I do think that the data that we've just seen does point to progress. Now, the critical issue, I think, is how we're going to move into the future, because we can move the use of course management systems to 100%, but it's not going to change fundamentally what we're doing. We need to get back to, and I think Matthew's done an excellent job of making the point of what needs to change in terms of the systems that we have in place so that the focus is on learning. Because many, and in fact I dare say a course management system really is designed to help the teacher, not to help learning. So we need to get our focus on the learning issues and how to design systems that will in fact improve student learning.
Susan, what data should we be looking for? I mean, is it this stuff that tracks the number of classes? Are we missing, are there other indicators we should be pursuing?
Well, I think there's kind of 3 levels in a course management system, and the first is the productivity level, and a lot of our faculty tend to use it for that, the grade books and the being able to take, watch what their students are doing. There's the knowledge management, which is the syllabus and the course notes, and then there's that 3rd level that really is a little bit more sophisticated, and that's the communication piece. And I think we really need to find ways to move our faculty up through that continuum.
Okay. This month marks the 9th anniversary of the 1997 interview with Peter Drucker, the Forbes interview, some would say the infamous interview, in which Drucker annoyed, some might say angered, many in the campus community with his assessment of the future of universities. Let me quote Professor Drucker. "Universities won't survive. Higher education is in deep crisis." How often have we heard that? Anyway, we are beginning to deliver more lectures and classes off campus via satellite or via two-way video at a fraction of the cost of traditional college courses. The college campus won't survive as a residential institution. Today's college buildings are hopelessly unsuited and totally unneeded. Gil, Cal State Monterey Bay is a new campus with new or renovated buildings. Drucker's assessment fair?
Well, in some cases, there's a little truth to everything, but I think the important part is we're using facilities differently. It isn't facilities to deliver classes, it's facilities to create learning spaces.
Yep.
It's about creating these environments for students to work with other students, to work with faculty in ways in which they couldn't do before. Facilities and building construction isn't any longer about building cookie cutter rooms that have, even today, raised floors. That's not the issue. It's placing them in locations in which they're part of a larger group. Whether we talk about creating residential spaces in the case of Monterey Bay, or we talk about creating spaces again in various locations in the community where learning occurs, it's where people meet and the interaction they have and what they walk away with and how they achieve their learning goals established by a faculty member that becomes paramount, not necessarily where they're doing it. So in some ways, he's right, but in other cases, facilities change because people do things differently in them.
Okay.
That's our goal, and we have to provide from a technology perspective various ways for them to be successful in those spaces. That's why wireless is useful. Not the answer, useful as part of a large set of tools that need to be available for faculty and students to take advantage of when they walk into that space or they engage in that space.
Matthew, let me pick up on Phil's point about change. It seems safe to say that traditional institutions will survive, Professor Drucker notwithstanding. But as our corporate e-learning advocate on the panel for the moment, if I may, how much will they have to change? Again, I think you brought us a very interesting perspective about systems that teach as opposed to systems that foster learning. Right. What kinds of changes are we talking about?
Well, I don't know that I am a corporate advocate. I mean, he's a lot smarter than I am and a lot more accomplished than I'll ever be, but I think it's a silly quote. I think it profoundly misses the nature of the education experience. I may be biased by the fact that I wouldn't want that to be the case for my children, and it's not the case for how I'm experiencing my doctoral program, although I obviously see a significant role for technology.
I don't think that's the case for his great-grandchildren on the trust fund either, but that may be another story.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't want to speak to that, but I think, we've always believed at Blackboard that what we're doing is helping institutions achieve their missions. We don't want to change the nature of institutions. I'm maybe one of the few people that thinks higher education is amazing. It's a unique social organizational form. It helped create the internet. It has one of the best track records in terms of organizational forms and what they try to accomplish in terms of instruction and human development and scholarship and research. And so what we're trying to do is figure out what is the mission. And there are lots of different types of missions. Phoenix has a very different mission from Cal State, which has a very different mission from a private religious institution. I don't think what we're trying to do is morph those forms into some sort of corporate, homogeneous corporate environment. What we're trying to do is amplify them to accomplish the missions that they've historically been focused on.
So John, if Matthew's saying not so much change but do better, what are some of the 2 or 3 do better challenges we confront in this area?
Well, I think, again, what we've got to figure out a way is to use technology to improve learning and to reach larger numbers of students. Because the fact of the matter is higher education has not yet grappled with the fact that we've got to reduce our costs over time. And unlike healthcare has made some changes now, we've not gotten there. And I think technology provides the promise. The big question for us is, can we take advantage and restructure the learning environment in a way that allows us to do a better job but to reduce costs?
Yeah. I think presidents bring a sensitivity to this cost issue that we don't hear from some other segments. So Gil, as the technology officer on our panel, the CIO on our panel, let me come at this a different way. We go through budget cycles in higher education. There are good years, there are bad years. Almost biblical, it seems. We go through 7 good and 7 bad sometimes. We're coming out of one of those bad cycles, at least the data that we see across the country in lots of different ways. Is the e-learning issue a zero-sum game given the competition for resources with other parts of the academic enterprise?
Absolutely not. In fact, part of the real challenges in institutions is work with individuals who realize that we're supporting learning across the campus. So it's no longer an IT issue exclusively, it's part of student affairs and others. I think those are the larger issues, that IT really does need to have a consistent form of funding, and that consistency isn't driven out of the CIO's office. The consistency is driven as part of the institution's adoption of uniform values that involve the requirement to use technology as it is appropriate, not as it may be less selective. So an important part for us is that technology is part of the vision and the mission of the institution. In this case of Monterey Bay, it is a uniform requirement. How we make it work in competition for scarce resources is when you find the values of the institution.
Well, it sounds like then you're affirming what some of the earlier panelists said in terms of we need to take the conversation away from hardware and software to resources and services. Matthew?
And we also lack a vocabulary. We don't know if the value of e-learning systems is based on student, cost per student. Is it cost for academic systems relative to administrative computing? Is it cost of e-learning supported instruction versus non-e-learning? We lack a vocabulary to even have informed discussions about the cost-value equation and the return on investment for instruction. Partly because the nature of academic instruction is so different than administrative processes. But the lack of that vocabulary makes it very, very difficult.
Yeah.
I think one of my favorite quotes is, if you're worried about the seat time, you're worried about the wrong side of the student.
And yet so much of our systems have been focused on that seat time. You think about particularly the early metrics we got out of our student information systems. They were credit hour ratios, and they've evolved, but in many ways they still aren't much better. We talked in the last panel, and a little bit here as well. There's this other issue about faculty. Some people talk about faculty as the legacy system. No offense to any of you who are or have ever been faculty, but certainly the faculty role is a very big part of this. Susan, you're the director of e-learning. What are the challenges in terms of the faculty role with e-learning?
Well, what we did, and I think it follows with what Matthew said, is when you put the student in the center and not in terms of learning and not teaching, you have a very different way of supporting faculty. And we actually had 3 ahas. And the first one was, we're not funding faculty anymore to develop courses. We're funding students to develop teaching and learning opportunities, and we're not even using course as the nomenclature for that. The second thing we're doing is that I gave up the fight of trying to change our promotion and tenure rules to have them accept e-learning and even teaching as being important. We're an R1 institution, and it's research and it's teaching and it's service. And I just knew I spent a lot of time fighting that battle, and it wasn't going to happen. What we do now is work with our faculty and talk to them about the scholarship of teaching and how they can get credit for doing what they're doing, but in many different venues than they were probably used to. And the third thing is to provide faculty with a rubric for being able to evaluate multimedia and new emerging technologies. Because we realized as they could understand and grade a test or grade a paper, but they really didn't have a clue about a movie or a PowerPoint or a podcast, and they needed a different vocabulary for being able to do that because they were very easily bamboozled by all the flash.
Sure. All right. Again, time goes quickly. Let me offer you each a very brief opportunity to make a closing comment about this challenge of moving from unique to ubiquitous. Gil?
Well, I think the end of it's clear to us that, in fact, we have to provide systems that support students where they are and where they need to learn. And part of that real challenge is to work with partnership with, oftentimes, cities, counties, other institutions. So the barriers of bureaucracy are in front of us, and we have to figure out a way to overcome them. Clearly, that's one of the key issues, because work is beyond the classroom, and it is at a time and place in which is not scheduled by the class schedule.
Susan, closing comment, unique to ubiquitous?
I guess I would say to really have a strategic vision and know what should be decentralized and what should be centralized, because it's hard to be ubiquitous when it's being segmented across a large institution.
Great. Matthew?
I think to be ubiquitous, we both have to think beyond the course, but also think beyond the university. And the one thing we haven't touched on is just how powerful the K-12 higher ed connections are. When you have 10, 20, 30% of incoming freshmen already having used e-learning systems, and when you graduate teachers who have experienced them in their own instruction and go back into the school district and bring it into K-12, that's when I think ubiquity happens in a very sort of natural, organic way.
John, closing comment from the president?
Well, go back to where I started. I think we've got to stay focused on is technology helping to provide more access? Is it improving learning? And is it allowing us to reduce our costs? And we can't lose sight of that if we're going to make this movement.
Great. My thanks to the panel members for this session, Gil Gonzalez, Susan Mitros, Matthew Patinsky, and John Welty for sharing their perspectives. My thanks to all our guests for their participation in today's program, and thanks too to our hosts at Blackboard and to the members of the Ready2Net production team. For those of us involved in producing Ready2Net, we hope that this conversation about the future of e-learning has proven to be informative and provocative. The free video archive of this program will soon be available on the Ready2Net website, along with the archives of all past Ready2Net programs. Also on the webpage for this program are a rich array of additional e-learning resources and references.
Committed to a rich college experience for all. Faculty committed to teaching and mentoring. Committed to hands-on learning in a great location. Committed to building a campus that enhances the student experience. Committed to real-world learning that contributes to the community. California State University, Monterey Bay, committed to the success of every student.